now affiliated with the Hudson Institute. Correct, right?
Yes.
Yes, and as Brookings prior to that, insider in the U.S. politics and following the Middle East in very much detail. So I welcome back again to Prague. Welcome to Severo and Mike. The floor is yours. I ask Mike to say a few words or to start to kick it off, and then I will have some questions, and then of course it's going to be open to your questions and comments, that we can have lively debate, and that nobody is going to be bored. You will want to be bored, and we are also not going to be bored here. So Mike, thanks for coming, and please.
Well, thank you, Tomasz. It's a great pleasure to be here. All the honor is mine. I've been here with my colleagues from the Hudson Institute, and it's been fantastic for us here. The Czechs, we discovered, in general have the same worldview as the Hudson Institute, which is not something we encounter everywhere we go, and certainly not everywhere in Europe. And it's been nothing but delightful and informative. I'll just say a few words about the debate in the United States about the Middle East, and then how I think it's going to play out in the election. The debate in Washington centers around Iran. This isn't always obvious, because a lot of the discussion is focused on Israel, the Palestinians, and so on. But the foreign policy debate is really between two schools of thought about how you stabilize the region and what the role of the United States is in the region. One school of thought, the one that is in power right now, is the Obama school of thought. It's Obama, Biden, Harris, and all of their top advisors. They have pretty much an identical view about what the role of the United States is. And put simply, they want to reach a strategic accommodation with Iran. So when the war broke out on October 7th, the administration had a couple of immediate goals in mind. One was to bring a ceasefire as soon as possible. There's no way that they could restrain Israel and say, don't attack against Hamas, after we saw how terrible the rapes and the massacre was. But they really wanted to shut it down as quickly as possible. The administration told the Israelis not to go into Gaza on the ground, not to go into Gaza City, not to go into Khan Yunis, and not to go into Rafah. Now, it really only became really public and clear about Rafah, but it was trying to stop it at each step of the way. So one goal was to get a ceasefire as soon as is possible, but without looking like we are constraining Israel too much. The second goal was to preserve the outreach to Iran. And so the way they say it is, we don't want the war to widen. But the war widened immediately. On October 8th, Hezbollah started attacking Israel. The American answer to that was, to Israel, don't escalate against Hezbollah. Certainly don't escalate against Iran. A couple of weeks later, the Houthis attacked Israel, and again, the administration's answer was, don't escalate. And they have, while instructing the Israelis not to escalate against Iran's proxies, they have also shielded Iran itself from attack by Israel or by the United States. The Houthis have been attacking Americans directly, American ships directly. The United States has only responded defensively to those attacks, or primarily defensively. There's been some exception to that, which we could discuss, but primarily defensively. But it certainly will not target Iranians for what the Houthis are doing. The Houthis are deeply influenced by the Iranians. There are Iranian advisors on the ground in Yemen, helping them with their targeting, and I would say encouraging them to attack Americans. But we will not hit an Iranian target in Yemen. The third thing that the administration goal that the administration had on October 7th was we must not allow this war to strengthen the Israeli right. So that's Netanyahu and his coalition, particularly his coalition partners, Smotrich and Ben Gvir, the religious nationalists. We must weaken the Israeli right. They spend more time thinking about weakening the Israeli right than they do thinking about weakening Iran. And they hate Netanyahu. They spend lots of time among themselves talking to each other about how much they hate Netanyahu. So the poor guys, they haven't succeeded in any of their goals. They haven't shut down the war. They haven't kept the war from widening, and they haven't undermined the Israeli right the way they wanted to. The other school of thought is the Trump. Let me just say a couple things about the school of thought. They believed prior to October 7th that they were stabilizing the Middle East by their outreach to Iran. And they had two achievements in their eyes that proved the success of their conception. One was the truce between the Houthis and the Saudis that they were working to turn into a peace treaty. And the other was the maritime border agreement between Lebanon and Israel, which was really an Israel-Hezbollah agreement brokered by the United States. But the United States also worked with Tehran quietly behind the scenes. And so they thought that they were de-escalating in the whole region and bringing the different parties into...
But they were also discussing this trilateral agreement of U.S., Israel, and Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
This was on the table, and this was moving ahead. And they never buried. On the contrary, they basically continued by this way with the Abraham Accords. So they have taken something, right? Or?
Yes and no. The Abraham Accords, as understood by Trump, the alternative conception that is the Trump conception of maximum pressure. So in the Trump worldview, or the Republican worldview, you might say that's a little crude because some Republicans actually agree with the Obama concept. The problem in the region is Iran, and in order to stabilize the region, we have to deter Iran and its proxies. So in the Trump concept, the Abraham Accords was the diplomatic and political framework in which we were going to create a security architecture for confronting Iran. These guys, the Obama-Biden team, or the Obama-Biden-Harris, they do not want to confront Iran. They want to cut a deal with them. And so the Abraham Accords, as they understood it, or the continuation of it, is not a security. It's not a security partnership. It's purely economic and political, or primarily economic and political. The other thing that they didn't like about the Abraham Accords, or one of the things that they most hated about them, when they came into power, they wouldn't say the words Abraham Accords. They hated the fact that that Trump ended the Palestinian veto over security cooperation between Israel and its Arab neighbors, or normalization with the Arab neighbors. So the Trump way, the Obama-Biden way, the Biden way was to bring back the centrality of the Palestinians together with the normalization with Saudi Arabia. So what they made the two-state solution, concessions by Israel to the Palestinians, as a prerequisite for Saudi-Israeli normalization. They packaged a whole lot of things together. The Israelis have to normalize with the Palestinians, or they have to reach a deal with the Palestinians, or at least a pathway, whatever that means, to a two-state solution. And in return for, at the same time, the Americans will give a security guarantee to Saudi Arabia, and the Saudis will normalize with the Israelis. So they resurrected, they brought the Palestinian question back to the center stage in the Middle East, which is where it is now. They have framed this conflict from October 7th as a Palestinian-Israeli conflict, not as an Iranian-Israeli conflict, which is how we should see it.
But I must say that I had a privilege last week to meet with Mohammed bin Salman, and he was very much stressing that it would be very helpful to keep the concept of the two-state solution, and that it would be very much easier for him to move and to stabilize the situation, not only to move bilaterally with Israel, but also to stabilize the situation on the ground. At least this is how I understood it, so that no one can quote me or can quote through me Mohammed bin Salman. So he has this line there. He understands the strategic picture, I think, and but it's not that it would be completely decoupled from the situation on the ground.
The thing is that so the Americans threw out the ball and the Saudis grabbed it, and they like it because the way things were moving in the Trump concept was that the Israelis, the Saudis would normalize with the Israelis and then get the security guarantee from the Americans. So in a way, it kind of subordinated them to the Israelis. You have to kiss the Jewish ring in order to get the prize of the American security guarantee. Biden, when he came into office, he distanced himself from Mohammed bin Salman, but then he came back as a supplicant. And you remember, in the meantime, the Saudis also went halfway to Beijing, and it was Beijing that brokered the Saudi-Iranian normalization. And then Biden came and changed his tune with Mohammed bin Salman. And then now it is the Israelis have to recognize the Palestinians. So the Israelis have to subordinate them to the Palestinians in order to get the normalization with Saudi Arabia. So it kind of, this concept that they have, the way they're working, the roadmap that the Biden team has come up with now, it flatters the Saudis because the Americans have come back to them now as supplicants, and because they're making the Israelis kiss the Palestinian ring before they get the Saudi prize. Do you see what I mean? So I understand why the Saudis like it, but the problem is there is no two-state solution. This is not in the cards. This is not going to happen.
I agree with you that it's definitely not going to be a two-state solution as we understand it, as relations between United States and Canada, or us and Germany. Okay, so I understand that, and I'm always also officially saying that it depends what kind of two-state solution and what it means in reality. If it means some kind of settlement of two nations living at one territory next to each other and in some stability and peace, so it can be called also two-state solution, but it's not the two-state solution as we know from Europe or from elsewhere in the world. It will be, the setup will be very unique. But conceptually, what Crown Prince was referring to, that there is a need for some kind of structure in order to move forward, that it's going to be easier to move forward, and that's a relevant argument.
Sure. I mean, you can say some kind of structure, but the minute you say two-state solution, it's not going to be accepted by the Israelis. The Israelis are going to keep security control of the Gaza Strip. There's no way. They won't necessarily be under total control of the population there in every way, but they're going to keep the Philadelphia corridor between the Gaza Strip and Egypt. They're going to keep a buffer around the Gaza Strip, and they're going to have the Netzarim corridor, which cuts the Gaza Strip in half. And so there's no way that's going to, we're going to have a Palestinian Authority there that will not be accepted by the Israelis. And they're going to, the Palestinian Authority's rule in the West Bank is I wouldn't say disintegrating, but it's being degraded over time. So I really don't see how this two-state solution, how it ever comes into being.
I agree with you. So I can still call it a two-state solution, but it's not going to be definitely a solution of two states with a sovereignty of states as we know it. Okay?
Yeah, there will be no sovereignty.
So that's very clear. The meeting with Mohammed bin Salman was in Brussels on the margins of EU GCC. I must say that it was quite a fascinating discussion, where all the Arabs were very realistic and very to the ground and not ideological and not frustrated. And I can't say it about half of the Europeans. Okay, so it's just it was fascinating how realistic the Arab leaders were from the GCC, how they were talking about the facts and the issues on the ground, how they were talking about how to improve the situation in a way that there is less terrorism and more stability, and that there is some kind of longer-term solution, and that was not raised at all by at least half of the European speakers, who were very much frustrated from their own past and very much ideological and not understanding the situation at all. So, and I will not name now the Arab leaders, but one was also saying, okay, I was in touch with Israelis recently, a few months ago, and I was asking them, so what do you want in Gaza? And the Israelis were telling me, we do not want to occupy Gaza. And I told them, yes, fine, I agree. So what do you want? And they said, the Israelis told me, and we do not want Hamas there. And I said, yes, I agree, we also don't want Islamists there. And then, so what do you want? And the Israelis said, we do not want chaos. And he said, great, I also do not want to have chaos there. So what do you want? And then there is unfortunately no Israeli answer. So I think this is the weakness of the Israeli position, that there is no answer of what is not exactly, but what is the day after, in which direction it should be, besides the fact that we must control the Philadelphia corridor, etc.
I don't think it's as weak as it looks. They can't answer the question right now for a couple of reasons. One is because the Americans are trying to cram down their throats the two-state solution. So if they say what their actual concept is, then it's putting their thumb in the eye of the Americans, and they're in a direct fight with the Americans. So instead, they just focus on the short term, in terms of their public discussion with the Americans, on the short-term security goals that they have. The other problem they have is if they start putting out a clear vision of what the day after looks like, then they fight among themselves, because there's a huge, even within the government, there's a huge disparity of views, a number of different views. So they're focusing on the security goals. The other thing is that the Americans are trying to shut down the war, and the Israelis want to see the war through to the total destruction of Hamas, which means destroying it not just as a terrorist army, but also as an entity that's capable of controlling the politics of that has a strangle grip over the politics. Right now, Hamas is still controlling the distribution of aid, and the American policy is working to help Hamas hold on to the control of that. So Israelis have to wrest the distribution of aid to the Palestinians away from Hamas. That's going to take some time. So we won't have any serious discussion coming from the Israelis about what the political contours of Gaza will look like until after they've taken the aid away from Hamas.
So what to expect after the US elections? Let's say we have two scenarios. Kamala Harris wins. So it's going to be more or less the same of what we see today, or are there going to be any shifts regarding the Middle East policy? So
regardless of who wins, I'm pretty sure, or I should say it like this, I strongly suspect that the Biden administration, together with Kamala Harris, are preparing a November-December surprise for Netanyahu, along the lines of what you and I were just talking about. I think there will probably be a UN resolution, either sponsored by the United States or quietly encouraged by the United States. You remember, as Barack Obama was leaving the White House in 2016, he gave a kick to the groin of Netanyahu with UN Resolution 2334, which recognized the Green Line as the pre-June 67 lines in the West Bank as the border of Israel, basically, and said that any communities, Israeli communities that are built over the Green Line are illegal settlements. We're going to have something like that, and it will probably be, I think, two things. I think there'll be recognition of a Palestinian state, or at least they're discussing it, American recognition of a Palestinian state. but also a call for immediate ceasefire and withdrawal by the Israelis from Lebanon and Gaza. Exactly what the formulation will be, we'll have to wait and see. Whether the Americans will put their name to it, or they'll do like they did in 2016. In 2016, the Americans winked at the New Zealanders and asked them to push it through. And then the Americans, Obama said, oh, my hands are tied. I can't stand up to the power of New Zealand, you know, because it's the power of international public opinion. It's too strong for me. But they're going to do something like that to keep the two-state solution alive, because that's what is in the DNA of the Biden team.
And isn't Bibi preparing some surprise like 2 days before the elections?
He will. I think he's going to strike Iran before the election.
On Sunday.
I thought it was going to be today.
Yep.
But
it's too far from the elections.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe he wants to. Yeah, maybe he wants to get a little closer to the election. But that'll happen no matter what. If Donald Trump wins, then we're going to have a policy that is more sympathetic to the Israelis and more hostile to Iran. I don't think it means that we're necessarily going to have a rubber stamp from Washington on all of the war aims of the Israelis or an end to any attempt to negotiate with the Iranians, but the inclination will be to move toward maximum pressure.
But by what you have been describing about the, let's say, the policies of the Democrats, then there is basically no hope for the Saudi-Israeli normalization, as it seemed to be the case prior to October 7th, even under the Biden administration. So, but now, if after this round of fighting, if it is about the necessity of the two-state solution as a precondition, then you are saying that with Kamala Harris there is no chance of having this type of normalization or some kind of triangle deal with Saudi Arabia.
I'm a great believer. I'm a follower of Osama bin Laden, who said that you know, nothing succeeds like a strong horse. If the Israelis destroy Hamas, and if they weaken Hezbollah even more, or if they destroy it, I don't think they can destroy it, but if they really undermine it even more, working with them will be very attractive. I personally don't know that we need normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. From an American national security point of view, what do we get for that? I mean, why is that all that important? We can get, in terms of the thing that matters most for the United States is the containment of Iran, and that requires primarily strong military cooperation between the United States and Israel, and it requires some key understandings between the United States and Turkey. The Saudis and the Israelis, they can have under-the-table relations.
Which they do have.
Which they have already, right? And that I think works quite well.
But from the point of view of Donald Trump, okay, he started the Abraham Accords, and this is another piece in to seal the Abraham Accords and to move forward and to have his legacy of the stabilization and of building the anti-Iran axis, but the stabilization, and by that, if he would be Democrat, he would already receive the Nobel Peace Prize, and for this, even the second one, because he's a Republican, he will never receive a Nobel Peace Prize, but he would deserve it. You know?
It would be a good thing. I would put it in the category of very good thing to get if you can. But look how convoluted this is. If you Israel do this with the Palestinians, and America makes a security guarantee to Saudi Arabia, then Saudi Arabia will normalize with you. From Mohammed bin Salman's point of view, he's not dying to normalize with Israel. First of all, Mohammed bin Salman doesn't really care about the Palestinians, right? You start talking to him about the Palestinians, and he falls asleep. He gets narcolepsy.
He cares about terrorism, not about Palestinians.
He cares. The thing that he cares the most about is the defense agreement with the United States and Saudi Arabia, right? And why not? if the United States needs the normalization, the United States can increase its defense cooperation with Saudi Arabia without necessarily tying it to the Israeli-Palestinian Israeli-Palestinian relationship or the Saudi-Israeli relationship. Let the Saudis and Israelis, if they are inclined to work with each other in whatever way they want to, the United States should work to facilitate it. But I don't think it needs to work to tie all of these complex things together. Either U.S.-Saudi defense cooperation is good for the two countries, or it's not. Either Saudi-Israeli defense cooperation is good for the two countries, or it's not. We don't have to pack it all into one box.
Is it possible to expect that there can be some deal on the oil prices between U.S. and Saudi Arabia?
If we have to lead in the region. The mistake that we made under Obama and under Biden is that we ceded the region to large parts of the region to Iran and its proxies. And that's what has driven Saudi Arabia to go halfway to China, the UAE to go halfway to China. We've been and strangely encouraged by the United States. If we present ourselves as what we were traditionally since Eisenhower and down to Obama, as the dominant power in the region, and we have a concept of what regional order should look like, and we deter those elements that are trying to undermine our order, which is what Iran is trying to do, then there will be all kinds of space for cooperation between the United States and Saudi Arabia on everything, including oil prices.
So, Michal Žantovský. Wait, microphone?
Yeah. Thank you. Well, you have both addressed the Gaza conundrum, and without providing answers, because there are no answers to have. But I think we all agree that the two-state solution is not
kaput.
Feasible at the moment, and but I think we also agree that the Israelis cannot stay in Gaza forever, and judging from what my Israeli interlocutors are telling me, do not want to stay in Gaza forever. So if you exclude the impossibles, the solution is what remains. And the only thing I don't think I'm the only one, can envisage is some kind of a multilateral security solution not based in the United Nations, because the Israelis will never accept that, but maybe fashioned loosely on the MFO in Sinai with more muscle than the MFO has. I don't think the Harris administration would go very far along those lines, but my question is, if Trump is elected, will they be willing to at least consider some kind of a solution like that, which would obviously have to include some of the regional countries like the Saudis and the Gulf countries and the United States?
I think it is a non-starter. I think you'll hear a lot of people talking about it, as they have been talking about it, but I think it's totally unrealistic. First of all, the Americans are not going to put boots on the ground to rule Palestinians. In today's American politics,
in the water would be enough.
Sorry?
In the water would be enough.
Okay, in the water. But then who are going to be the forces on the ground keeping order? The Israelis now are starting to, according to the Israeli press reports the last couple of days, they're contracting through a guy who's now an Israeli American, who is going to bring in private contractors to control some areas as a pilot program to take the humanitarian aid away from Hamas, separate Hamas from the population. That's a scenario, but that's basically indirect Israeli control of the Gaza Strip. The idea that Emiratis or Saudis are going to come in and rule Gazans and separate Hamas from the populations seems to be a total non-starter, because let's not forget that Hamas is a proxy of Iran. Iran is trying to keep Hamas alive. American policy is trying to reach an accommodation with Iran. There's a huge contradiction at the heart of American policy, and there's a kind of a lie at the heart of American policy. But you have to understand what the lie is all about. The Americans are saying you have to stop the war now, Israel. Stop it now for humanitarian reasons. That means Hamas stays alive. At the same time, they're saying, but we have to have a two-state solution with a revitalized Palestinian Authority. And I don't know how you revitalize a Palestinian Authority. But now, we either say that these are just meaningless slogans, or they have a concept that they're not being honest about. And it's the latter. They have a concept. They are trying to create in Gaza what we have in Lebanon. In Lebanon, we have a Potemkin facade of a Lebanese government, and behind which the real power is Hezbollah. And the United States goes and negotiates with Hezbollah by engaging with the quote-unquote legitimate institutions. So we go and we send Amos Hochstein to Lebanon, and he talks to Nabi Berri, the Speaker of the Parliament. Nabi Berri is the ally of Hezbollah, and he's basically the messenger boy to Hezbollah. We understand that we are negotiating with Hezbollah, but we pretend that we're negotiating with the legitimate institutions in Lebanon. Everybody plays a version of this game where we say, we don't talk to terrorists, but of course we talk to the guy who talks to the terrorists, and we understand that the guy making the real deal is the terrorist. So the concept of regional order that they had was that the Biden team is, we talk to Tehran over the heads of the Israelis, and we tell them what we'd like to do in Lebanon, and then we talk to Hezbollah through Nabi Berri, and we come to an agreement, and it's sealed as an agreement between the state of Lebanon, which doesn't actually exist, and the international community. They want to do the same thing in Gaza. They want to have a facade, a veneer of the Palestinian Authority, behind which is Hamas. And the United States negotiates with Iran quietly over in the corner with no one seeing, and it comes to an acceptable agreement. That's the only way this works. If the Saudis and Emiratis were to go in on the ground and actually start separating Hamas from the population, you would find Houthi missiles would start flying into Saudi Arabia and into the UAE. And they know that. So they're not going to do it. Now, they have the United States. The United States is barreling down on them and saying, you got to help us, you got to help us. And so they say, yes, sir, we're going to help you. And then you see all of these press accounts about how we're going to have a joint. There's going to be an American guy, sitting on a ship offshore in Gaza, and then we're going to have an Emirati police force and so on. This will never happen. I'll bet you my house on this.
But this is the scenario of United States under Harris, okay?
Yeah.
Like pushing. What is the scenario of United States under Donald Trump? He doesn't care about Gaza.
He doesn't care.
Yeah.
And by the way, nor does Mohammed bin Salman. Mohammed bin Salman has had a year of watching all of these, I'm saying in his heart of hearts. Yeah. In his heart of hearts. If we talked to him on a week after October 7th and we talked about the Palestinians, he'd just fall asleep. Now he's had a year of seeing all of the bombs and all of the civilians and everything. He's got a public opinion that he cares about. But a year from now, once Gaza is stabilized, we're going to be in a new reality.
Yeah, but I think that he cares about the fate of Saudi Arabia, and he doesn't want to see terrorists running countries or regions or territories around Middle East. So he cares about Gaza in a way that he doesn't want Hamas to be running Gaza. And he doesn't want Hezbollah, of course, to be running Lebanon.
That makes him the ally of Israel and what the Israelis are doing. The tacit ally.
I can tell you that in the meeting in Brussels, all the Arabs, of course, they were speaking about humanitarian crisis and need for humanitarian aid, I understand. But they were saying we must crush terrorism.
Yeah.
And we must use the opportunity that Hezbollah is weakened in Lebanon and maybe weakened even further, and to somehow try to reshape Lebanon and strengthen the Lebanese authority over Hezbollah and to change the dynamics there. You did not hear such thinking and such ideas from any European, zero, okay? This is the world we live in, okay? So, because they very much know who is the enemy, they very much know who is the enemy of their own state and who can make troubles for their own society. And it is Islamists, and it is Iran, and definitely it is not the Israelis, okay? So this is
the problem here, so I'm with you 100%. That's exactly the picture I have. The problem here is that we have the greatest power in the world, which is the dominant military power in the Middle East, the United States, which is going to them and saying, we have to have a two-state solution with a revitalized Palestinian Authority.
Okay, but my question was, what is going to happen after Donald Trump is elected? Of course, if he is elected, but what is going to happen? He will give a free hand, I don't care, do whatever you want, or is he going to try to push some policy and his people to push some policy to do the Saudi deal as part of the puzzle to somehow move Israelis somewhere,
he would like
to
to
somewhere lines and to what to do with Iran, etc. He will push for lowering the oil prices because it's good for the American customers, it's good for weakening Vladimir Putin, and it's good for weakening Iran. Okay.
He will definitely he will see how far he can get with the Saudi-Israeli normalization, but if the price of Saudi-Israeli normalization is anything looking like a two-state solution, or anything involving an Israeli recognition of the Palestinian Authority as the sovereign over West Bank and Gaza, it's a non-starter. It's absolutely unacceptable in Israeli politics today. The Knesset voted against it. All of the guys that the United States is trying to substitute Netanyahu for in Israeli politics. I'm talking about Gantz, I'm talking about Lapid, I'm talking about Bennett, and so on. They all had to vote. They either had to run away and abstain from the vote on no two-state solution, or they had to vote no two-state solutions. It's absolutely unacceptable in Israeli politics, and so I agree with the gentleman that in this sense, that something that cannot happen will not happen. It simply won't happen. So if Trump would like Saudi-Israeli normalization, if he can do it without the two-state solution, then he'll go for it. If not, it won't happen.
And what's going to be his policy regarding Iran?
He's going to be a lot tougher on Iran than Biden, but the goal, the necessary condition to stabilize the region and to chasten Iran is to put Iran before a credible military threat. A credible military threat, not just from the Israelis, but from the Israelis backed up by the Americans. Trump is going to be somewhat reluctant to do that with American forces for all the reasons that we've seen. There's a wing of his party that is skeptical about the application of American military power in the Middle East. And so he's going to be more supportive of the Israelis and more supportive of putting pressure on Iran. But when it comes down to actual military action against the Iranians, I think he's going to pull his punches a bit. That's most likely what we'll see.
So who is going to win the elections in the U.S.?
Donald Trump.
For sure.
Well, my colleagues and I are split on this. Everyone thinks that Trump is the favored. I think it's going to be a comfortable Trump win. I even used yesterday the term landslide, and then they started giggling at me. So I backed away from it. But I have to say, I'm saying this not based on. I'm not an expert on domestic American politics. I'm not following every poll carefully about what's going on in the swing states and so on, but you can feel in your gut that that Kamala Harris's campaign has run out of gas, and she is empty. She's an empty vessel, and the world is starting to see it. The electorate is starting to see it. Some significant portion of the electorate, and they're in panic mode. And so I think Trump is going to win comfortably.
And then if he wins, who are going to be key foreign policy people around him?
Rick Grenell. Rick Grenell, maybe Senator Hagerty, maybe Mike Pompeo, Robert O'Brien, Devin Nunes. Devin Nunes will probably be the head of the CIA. Rick Grenell would like to be Secretary of State.
But he will not be confirmed.
I don't know if he'll be confirmed. Then he'll be a National Security Advisor. I don't know what Robert O'Brien, maybe Robert O'Brien wants to be Secretary of State. Hagerty would like to be Secretary of State. There's also the possibility of Tom Cotton. I don't know if he's going to stay in the Senate, what he will do. But Trump talks to Cotton a lot.
And so what's going to be?
Mike Pompeo, my colleague.
I know it's not going to. It's not your field, but what's going to be his policy towards Ukraine?
By the way,
policy of Trump and the team. So what to expect there? What to expect regarding not the war in the wars in the Middle East, which we have discussed, but what to expect here in Europe?
Trump, I think, is probably going to work toward a negotiated settlement in Ukraine. The nightmare scenario would be a negotiated settlement that allows Putin to carry out a policy of salami tactics, to solidify everything that he's got now, a ceasefire, which he can, and then 6 months, a year later, he can open up hostilities again after the coalition starts to weaken and so on. That would be the nightmare scenario. Obviously, Trump is going to want to present this as some kind of negotiated settlement as permanent and more stable than that.
Well, for me, nightmare scenario is that not that there is a ceasefire where it is and that the country is divided, but if it would mean from Trump the recognition of the occupation of the eastern part of Ukraine as part of Russia, and if it would mean that Ukraine will never be part of NATO, and I'm not saying part of NATO tomorrow, but never be part of NATO, and if there would not be funding for Ukrainian military to be able to build up the capabilities in order to deter Russia to go for another cycle.
Yeah, we have to wait and see. Right now, a lot of the statements that are being made about Ukraine are really domestic politics masquerading as foreign policy, which is, you can get too clever with this kind of thing because once somebody says something 5 times to a politician, then it starts to become their actual policy. But the Ukraine question is really wrapped up in the Trump versus the establishment. Remember that the impeachment of Trump, one of the impeachment efforts was based on Ukraine. Remember that Hunter Biden was deeply involved in the corrupt landscape of Ukraine, and of course the war is taking place on Biden's watch. So it's Biden's war and not Trump's. Once Ariel Sharon used to say that what you see from here, you don't see from there. So meaning that it's easy to, when you're in the opposition, to say one thing. When you actually have responsibility for power, you'll say another. All of the traditional American concerns will come back. Trump was actually pretty strong on Russia, pretty tough on Russia, on Putin when he was in power. Putin, the man, he made lots of sympathetic statements toward, but in terms of his actual policy, Nord Stream 2, supporting the Ukrainian military and so on, he was actually quite tough. So we have to wait and see how it plays out. A lot of the guys around him, some of the guys around him, if Mike Pompeo is there, if Tom Cotton is there, if Hagerty is there, and so on.
Robert O'Brien.
Yeah, Robert O'Brien. They will have at least some of the traditional Republican security concerns will have. But
not Grenell. If Grenell has got the upper hand, it's going to look like different. It's going to look different.
It might look different, but we'll see. Trump likes to hear a variety of different views and then be the decider. And Trump, he's adopted the Reagan slogan of peace through strength. He likes to look strong. So I would say it depends. If you're a pessimist, there's lots of reasons to be very worried. if you're an optimist, there's lots of reasons to look forward to something better.
So last topic, China. So what's going to be the policy towards China? Is it going to be purely economic, raising tariffs, or is it going to be something more? What's going to be, what to expect there?
I think there's been a lot more continuity from Trump to Biden on China, and so I expect to see more of the same. I don't think we're going to see the kind of changes that I think we'll see in the Middle East and possibly on Ukraine.
More tariffs on China?
We'll have to wait and see.
So it's not guaranteed that he would go into an economic war.
I think Trump likes to look strong, but he likes to also look reasonable. I don't think he wants to start out his presidency going to war with China, Russia, and Iran all at once.
Any other questions, comments? No?
I bored you to death, all of you? Nothing. I've never felt so bored. There we go.
So,
there we go.
There's been a report that an American intelligence assessment of the Israeli posture vis-à-vis Iran has been leaked to Iran. Do we have any news on that, and do you expect this to be ever investigated properly and the culprit discovered?
Do we have any news on it? So there's a story going around that Ariane Tabatabai in the Defense Department is the one who leaked it. I don't believe that. She is out of the Rob Malley School of Iran Appeasement, and she was seen to be in contact with people in Tehran about American policy, and so she's a very controversial figure, and she's a symbol of the Iran appeasement element in the Biden administration. So I think somebody anonymously has accused her of being responsible for this, because it's a good way to attack the sort of appeasement wing of the Biden administration by associating her with it. But I see no reason to believe that report. I mean, she might have done it, but I doubt it. I doubt it. I don't believe it was. I don't believe it was a policy leak. There are these leaks which are not really leaks. They're controlled releases of information which are designed to undermine Israeli military action. They happen quite often under Obama and under Biden, but they have a certain look to them. You know, the administration, when it's the CIA leaks to the Washington Post, and the State Department leaks to and the White House leaks to the New York Times. This is different. This is actual U.S. intelligence documents. I suspect it was an individual hostile to Israel, a troubled individual who may or may not be caught.
Michael?
Thank you. Follow up on that. It's have you detected any signs that the Israelis are seriously concerned about this? Could it, after all, be an intelligence game rather than a real issue?
I have no idea how concerned they are. They have to be concerned just in the nature of the world when your greatest ally is spying on you, basically, and the intelligence that they gather is being leaked to the world. That's got to be disturbing to you. I don't think that this whole thing was cooked up as a clever ruse, because the United States the Biden administration is legitimately interested in reducing the scope of what the Israelis are going to do against Iran. So I can't imagine the Biden administration working hand in glove with the Israelis to deceive the Iranians on this question. How much the Israelis are disturbed by it in terms of how much their operation against Iran is impeded by it. As there's an article out today in the Times of London saying that they have delayed their reprisal against Iran because they're so disturbed by this. I have no idea if that's true. That kind of thing could be deception by the Israelis. But I don't think the actual leaking of the document was deceptive.
So it would have been gathered intelligence rather than shared intelligence.
Yes.
No, it's clearly that the U.S. doesn't want any really strong, that the U.S. knows that there is going to be Israeli reaction, and they do not want a strong reaction, especially not, which would mean a retaliation, especially not before the elections, and especially not against the oil industry, which would mean rising oil prices, not good for the election results if you are in the office or for Kamala Harris. So, so I think that this is their conclusion. I do not know if this type of league has not brought it closer to the U.S. elections of the Israeli attack, and that may very well be the case. Michal.
Good afternoon. I have a little bit different question. You haven't mentioned ever Europe or European Union in your remarks, and I was wondering. We spent hours and hours producing various statements. European comes to conclusions and other statements. Does anybody care about those in the Middle East, in Iran, in Saudi Arabia, in Israel? And how do you see, is there a role for Europe in the Middle East, especially like for the French? They have a lot of interest in Lebanon, for example. So is there any role for Europe or for the Czechs to help?
Sure. There is, of course, there's a role. The Obama administration, when I was in the White House, which was 2005 to 7, our primary partner on the Middle East, particularly on the Iran question, which I've argued is the central question. Our primary partner in Europe on the Iran question was France. Both on the Iranian nuclear question, but also on Syria and Lebanon. And we were marching in lockstep with them. I think it's the only area of American foreign policy where the French and the Americans were just like walking hand in hand like lovers. But then when Obama came in, he shifted it, and he worked through the Germans. Because the German traditional attitude toward Iran is very much like what their traditional attitude toward Russia was, that the best way to moderate their behavior is through economic engagement. And that's how Obama and Biden saw it as well. So it changed the relationship, the partnership with Europe over the Middle East. And the French then got left out. They were, when the JCPOA was being negotiated, the French tried to hold out as long as possible for a tougher, more serious policy that would actually stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, because they're quite serious on the non-proliferation side. And that effort by the French was punished doubly, because they annoyed the Americans, they annoyed Obama, and they were also put in the back of the line by the Iranians for contracts for Total and other companies. So the French then, having been whipsawed by American policy, the French drew the proper conclusion, which is they should just become, for the most part, with respect, with the exception of the non-proliferation side of their team. They are much more in the engagement of Iran side now of the debate. So the gap between the French and the Germans on Iran, which was tremendous, has narrowed very considerably. The British the British will follow whatever lead they get from Washington, I think. And so that's I think where we are. Of course, the Europeans have an important role to play in terms of implementation of the policy, but the main lines are going to be set out of Washington. The big decision about the framework in which this is all going to be is going to be implemented is going to be set out of Washington. And the Europeans are I always think of sort of X minus. So when I was in the White House, if our policy was X, the French were X on Iran, the British were X minus 1, and the Germans were X minus 3. But it's our policy that sets the table for everything. As for the Czechs,
what is X? What?
X is just the American.
No, but what are the Czechs are X? You don't have to answer that.
Okay. Yeah. No, the Czechs. I have to commend you. People told me it was your brainchild. If the Czech ammunition initiative. I think that is a brilliant foreign policy move. Both because it was highly effective, it made a real impact in the world, but it also it did something. It filled in a niche that the Americans couldn't fill, and I think that one of the great advantages of being the Czech Republic is you have a very clear vision of what's happening in the world, what the Czech interest is. Which direction things need to move, and you're lighter on your feet and more agile than the Americans are. So you can look for opportunities like that to play a role. I think a country like the Czech Republic can punch way above its weight with initiatives like that. It is going to play a role. I mean, there's a growing picture. I think I speak for everyone in my institute when I say we see the world as China, Russia, and Iran versus China, Russia, Iran, North Korea versus the United States. They may not be planning, let's say China, Russia, and Iran may not be planning every move together in every arena, but they share the general goal of weakening the American-led order, and China is going to be primarily concerned about weakening it in East Asia and the Iranians in the Middle East and Russia in Europe. That view is growing in the United States. It's not a consensus either on the left or on the right. The Trump administration is going to be well populated by people who see the world that way. There's no doubt about it. But there are going to be others who are going to make arguments such as we can detach Russia from China. There's a deal. Putin wants a deal in Ukraine. There's a deal to be had. We have to pursue it, and so on and so forth. I'm actually I'm reluctant to make any really firm predictions about exactly how this is going to play out, for the reason I said before, that the domestic politics are influencing all of the statements about this in a lot of ways. Once they're actually in power and they have to actually have real concrete proposals and they put them to Putin and they get the response from Putin, then a lot of this is going to sort itself out as they come into contact with what Russia actually is. And exactly how it's going to do, I'm not sure. I'm a little bit more optimistic though than I think some observers are, because I think that there's a kind of traditional American attitude toward these things, and I have confidence that despite all of the disruption in our politics and all of some of the more frivolous ideas that are floating around at the top levels of our government, I think they will sort themselves out over time. Now, it might be quite painful for the Ukrainians while this is happening, but I am relatively optimistic.
And looking back into the Trump's first presidency, and not that the second one would be the same, but is it the right assumption that he will try to use the force as a threat, but not to use it actually, and rather to use the economic power as more or in combination? Is this his like strategy, and is this strategy going to continue? Because he did not use force almost at all,
right, besides
targeting Soleimani and besides those like very limited operations.
Yes, yes, and I mean, one huge change that we're going to see immediately is a change in energy policy, and that will change the relations with Russia significantly, and change relations in the Middle East as well. The problem we have in using, I think that the past track record of the Trump administration is a pretty good blueprint for, or it's a good model to look at when thinking about what the next Trump administration is going to be like. The problem we have is that the world has changed significantly since he was in power. Options that he had back then, he might not have. Now, but I do think we're going to see reluctance to use hard power. We are going to see that. I think it's built into the system at the moment.
Any other comment, question? No? All right, well, we have exhausted almost 90 minutes or 75 minutes. So I do thank you for this discussion. Let's see if your prediction that it's going to be Donald Trump, let's see if it's...
Donald Trump in a landslide. Remember that prediction.
Donald Trump in a landslide. By the way, when I am asked in my position, official position, then I'm always saying, and I really mean it, that first of all, we need a strong American president. We need elections which will have clear result, that there will be clear winner and it's not going to be disputed. And then a clear, and then a strong American president who is going to be strong, especially by, who's going to be seen as strong, especially by the adversaries. Last question to the U.S. elections: how does it look with the House and the Senate? Because strong U.S. President means that. It's a strong president with a clear vision, but also who can cooperate with Congress on some of the issues, including some of the foreign policy issues where he needs backing of Congress and where he needs laws to be voted for. And I don't mean only, and I don't mean even primarily the Congress in order to back the president to go to war, but I mean more on the economic or, for example, on the foreign, meaning defense aid and defense assistance.
So Peter Rao, my colleague, I always look to him to tell me he follows the domestic politics.
He can get a microphone. Huh?
And he says that we could give it to him. I don't like to let him talk though. He says that the Senate is almost certainly going to be Republican, and the House will go whichever way the presidency goes. But I'll let him say it in his.
I think that's basically it. In the Senate, our Senate is elected every 6 years in its entirety. So every 2 years, a third of the Senate is up for election. And it just so happens that this congressional map, this Senate map, favors the Republicans far more than the Democrats. And it's already a razor-thin margin. There are 2 states on election night to watch for the Senate. In West Virginia, that race is basically cooked and over. The Republicans will win. And then the other would be out in Montana, where there's a very effective Democratic retail politician, which is to say someone who knows the state very well. But Montana is a deeply conservative state, and so the Democrat incumbent, John Tester, is likely going to lose there. And if that happens, both of those, assuming the Republicans hold serve in places like Florida and Texas, then it looks like the Republicans will take the Senate. The House, I think, has been much more difficult to predict, and maybe 6 months ago, election prognosticators would have predicted that the Democrats will take the majority. I think that has now swung to giving the Republicans a slight edge, and you feel that in Washington. amongst Republican House members who are a little bit more optimistic, and I think Democratic election campaigners who are maybe a little bit more pessimistic than they were. But it's so close that in the US system we talk about coattails, and when the president has coattails, it means that members can hang on to the coattails and try to ride that to the finish line. And so if Donald Trump wins, especially in a landslide, as Mike predicts, then I would imagine that Republicans keep the House.
You don't predict a landslide. How would you tell them? Peter actually follows all of this much closer than I do. So what's your prediction, Peter?
I think Trump will win. It's close right now, but the momentum is with Trump, and it seems like he's slowly but surely breaking open the race. There's a Wall Street Journal poll out today. It's an excellent poll with a good reputation that has Trump ahead in the national vote. But of course, we don't elect our presidents based on national total aggregate votes, but by specific swing states. And so if he's already ahead in the national vote, the consensus is that he'll be better in the states. And maybe as a last comment on that, the state really to watch is Pennsylvania, which is the ultimate swing state this cycle. And most professional operatives argue that Kamala Harris is not all that well placed in Pennsylvania, which is sort of a working class, even union state, and so it's going to be hard for her, whereas Donald Trump appeals to that voting bloc. It's also connected to your earlier question about tariffs and international political economy. Part of the reason the U.S. is not interested in market access agreements, and Donald Trump forged minor agreements in the Indo-Pacific, but then simply renegotiated NAFTA, is because those states are probably the states in the U.S. that are the most skeptical about new market agreements and free trade.
Do you agree with me that the electorate is recognizing Kamala Harris as a non-entity wrapped in a zero inside a nothingness?
Yeah, I mean, I think that some campaigns have great campaign teams and weak candidates, and others have great candidates with weak campaign infrastructure. So if this was 1992 or 1996, you would say as the campaign manager, go Bill Clinton, mesmerize crowds, and he could do that. Or Ronald Reagan, great campaigners. I think in this instance, much like 2016 with Hillary Clinton, it's the campaign team dragging the candidate to the finish line. And every time she goes out and does interviews, which she's done more of late, I don't think she's helped herself, which is why I think Trump might have momentum.
I just hope that those workers in Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Wisconsin will be lobbying enough for further support and aid to Ukraine, because those are the most benefiting states from the aid and defense support of Ukraine. From the swing states, okay, there are some others, but from the swing states, those are getting a lot of billions of dollars and a lot of workers being paid because of US supplies to Ukraine and because of the boom of the defense industry and basically the need for defense supplies anywhere across the globe and anywhere across the Western world. All right, thank you very much. So thanks also to Peter and Mike. Thank you very much, and thanks for coming to Prague.
Thank you.